You woke up this morning and there was already a cardinal at the back fence, maybe a pair of chickadees in the maple. If you watched long enough, a dark-eyed junco working the ground under the feeder, methodical, quiet, like it had been there 100 times before. It probably has. I've been doing this for about 5 years now, standing at the kitchen window before the coffee's done, watching the same small yard in Northern Virginia come alive in the same order, with the same birds, in the same spots. I do this every morning. And for the first couple of years, I thought that was just how birds worked. You put up a feeder, birds show up. Generic birds, interchangeable birds. You're not really watching individuals, you're watching a category. I was wrong about that, completely wrong. The birds in your yard right now are not random, they are specific. They have been making deliberate, documented navigational decisions to come back to your patch of ground year after year. Not your neighborhood, not your block, your yard. And the science behind why they keep coming back is one of those things that, once you understand it, changes what you see when you stand at that window. Welcome to the channel. If you're new here, subscribe before you leave. We go deep on the science of backyard birds and what it actually means to share a yard with wild animals. Today, we're going through 7 reasons the same birds keep returning to your yard, year after year. Stay until the last one. I've been sitting with it for 4 winters, and I still don't quite have the words for it. Number 1, the birds in your yard are not visiting. They live there. This is the part most people don't know, and it shifts something when you hear it. The technical term is site fidelity, the tendency of a bird to return to and use the same specific location year after year. Not approximately the same area, the same yard, the same holly bush, in some documented cases, the same branch. Cornell Lab of Ornithology has mapped site fidelity across dozens of North American songbird species. Northern cardinals, the red male at your feeder right now, 45 grams, roughly the weight of a golf ball, return to within 50 meters of their prior breeding territory in subsequent years. 50 meters. That's roughly the distance from your back door to your property line. They're not wandering back into the general area. They're coming back to a specific piece of ground they've already decided is worth holding. American robins show breeding site fidelity above 70%. Dark-eyed juncos, those small gray birds that appear in your yard every winter and vanish north every spring, return to the same winter territory at a rate of 60 to 65% across years. The research backs this up. Work out of the Journal of Avian Biology shows that up to 78% of banded songbirds come back to within 100 meters of where they were last year. Every single year. Here's what those numbers mean in plain language. It's not about your feeder. It's not about your neighborhood being a good neighborhood for birds. It's not about habitat quality in general. It's about your specific yard, a specific patch of ground that a specific bird has already mapped, tested, and decided is worth the trip back. The bird at your feeder right now is likely not the first bird to find your yard. In many cases, it's the same bird that found it last year, and the year before. It has been making a deliberate return every season, choosing your yard over the one next door for reasons that are more specific and more personal than most of us have considered. Number 2, your yard exists inside their heads in more detail than you probably expect. When a bird establishes site fidelity to a location, it doesn't just remember that food was available here. It builds what researchers call a spatial memory map, a detailed internal model of the territory encoding every food source, every escape route, every spot where a predator has appeared, and the sound cues associated with specific humans who use the space. Stay with me here, because this one gets personal quickly. Research out of the University of Cambridge on non-migratory songbirds shows that birds don't simply return to stable habitat. They return to specific locations within that habitat because it worked last time. What the Cambridge work found, in plain terms, is that birds weren't returning to good habitat in general. They were returning to the exact spot that had worked before. The feeder that was there last year is a data point in an active memory. The heated bird bath by the steps, the holly where they sat out the January cold, snap. These aren't interchangeable good habitat features. They are specific locations encoded in a specific bird's working memory, updated and referenced every season. Black-capped chickadees, 11 grams, the weight of 2 pennies, are among the most studied species for this. They maintain winter home ranges of 10 to 25 acres, and within that range, they track individual food cache sites by spatial memory alone. But they're also tracking the humans in their territory. The term researchers use is anticipatory behavior toward specific individuals. A bird pre-positioning itself at a feeder before the specific person who typically fills it is even visible, responding to the sound of that person's footstep on the back stairs or the sound of a particular door. At 6:43 on a Tuesday morning in February, before I had touched the back door knob, both chickadees were already at the feeder. Not coincidence, pattern recognition. They'd filed the sound. I don't have great words for what it feels like to realize that 2 birds weighing 11 grams each have built a mental model that includes you as a named feature of their territory. But once you know it, you can't unknow it. The yard is shared. The birds know more about how you use it than you might be comfortable admitting. Number 3. Some of the birds returning to your yard are not just returning to your yard, they're returning to you. I thought the same thing most people think, that the relationship was transactional and anonymous. Put up the food, birds show up, that's the whole deal. The bird doesn't know it's your feeder any more than you know which car was at the gas pump before yours. 3 years into paying real attention, I can tell you that's not how it works. The research on individual human recognition in birds, work coming out of the University of Washington by John Marsluff and his team, has produced some of the most striking results in behavioral ornithology of the past 2 decades. American crows, 450 grams in documented tool users, were shown to recognize specific human faces and maintain that recognition for 5 years and counting. Birds that perceived a researcher as threatening continued to mob that specific face half a decade later. And they taught that threat assessment to their offspring. The behavior spread through the local crow population without the offspring ever having had direct contact with the original researcher. It's not only crows. Chickadees adjust their alarm response based on assessed threat level of specific humans in their territory. Carolina wrens, 22 grams, improbably loud for their size, can learn the daily schedule of a specific yard owner within weeks and begin responding to the sound of that person before they're even visible. Northern mockingbirds, which may defend the same territory for 8 years or more, develop what researchers call individualized behavioral profiles, meaning they don't just recognize you, they know exactly how you behave. I keep coming back to this, because what it means is that the bird returning to your yard has a file on you, what you look like, how you move, whether you're the one who fills the feeder or the one who walks toward it too quickly. That file was started the first time they noticed you in the yard, and it's been updated every time since. Depending on what's in it, you are either a reason to come back or a reason to be careful. In my yard, there are birds with a very specific entry about a bright orange jacket and a morning in May 2022 that I handle differently now. Number 4. Some of the birds in your yard navigated over 2,000 miles to get back to it. This is the one I find hardest to hold in my head, even after 5 years of thinking about it. Long-distance migratory songbirds don't return to the same general region after wintering south. The data on this from the Max Planck Institute is hard to wrap your head around. We are talking about individuals completing journeys of 2,000 miles or more and landing within 200 meters of last year's territory. White-crowned sparrows, 29 grams, small enough to hold in one closed hand, navigate using Earth's magnetic field. They combine that with a star map calibration they learned during their very first migration, and they use that map to return year after year to a landing zone the size of roughly 2 or 3 city blocks, not near where they were last year, not somewhere in your zip code, not the right general region of the right state, the same yard, the same feeder. In documented cases, the same branch of the same shrub. There's a technical term for the pull of the original site, natal philopatry, the tendency of a bird to return to breed or winter near the first location where it found success. What it produces in practice is a migration pattern oriented around a specific destination. Your yard, if a bird chose it once, is on the map. Pay attention to this. The wood thrush that showed up in your yard last April ate for 3 days and disappeared north. It may be on its way back right now. The same individual bird, the same landfall after the same long trip. The idea that it just happened to land in your yard, out of every yard in your neighborhood, is statistically unlikely. It chose your yard. If the habitat reads the same when it arrives, it will choose it again. That's not a feeling. That's navigation. And it is aimed, more precisely than most of us have considered, at a specific patch of ground that happens to be yours. Number 5. Now let's talk about the part that gets uncomfortable. You think the birds in your yard keep coming back because your yard is suitable, good habitat, available food, the right kind of cover. And that's partially true. But here's what that framing misses entirely. If a bird has been using your yard for 2 or 3 years, it's not assessing your yard anymore. It already assessed your yard. The decision is made. What it needs now is for that specific location to still exist when it navigates back. And we are frequently the ones who make it stop existing. Here's where it gets significantly worse. The things birds return to most reliably: dense shrubs for shelter and nesting, a feeder in a consistent location, standing dead wood with insect access, a water source that was there before, are often the first things we remove. We trim the overgrown holly because it looks messy. We take out the dead oak because it makes us nervous about the roof. We move the feeder 3 feet to the left because that's where it's easier to refill. We renovate the back corner of the yard. And what we've done, without meaning to, is erase a specific feature from a specific bird's map of a place it has been navigating toward for years. Remember that Cambridge study about spatial memory we just talked about? This is where it bites us. Move the feeder and you've moved the landmark. The bird arrives at the right general yard and finds that something in the map doesn't match. I learned this the hard way, or almost did. About 2 years ago, I got a quote to remove the holly bush by the back fence. It had grown large, a little ragged, and it was overhanging the property line. I delayed because the timing wasn't right. And then I started reading about site fidelity and nesting return rates in northern cardinals. Returned to within 50 meters, same dense nesting shrub, year after year. I've not called for another quote. What helps is simpler than most people expect. Leave the dense shrubs. Leave the standing dead wood if it isn't a safety issue. Keep your feeder in the same location across seasons. When you add to your yard, add, don't replace. Because the yard a specific bird is navigating back to is not a yard like yours. It's yours, exactly as they left it. Number 6. The bird in your yard right now may have learned about your yard from its parents. When a bird establishes a breeding or wintering territory in a location, the young it raises there develop an elevated tendency to return to that same area as adults. A cardinal pair that nests in your holly in April and raises 3 fledglings has introduced those birds to the specific spatial cues of your yard during the most important learning window of their early lives. 1 or 2 of those fledglings may establish their own territory near your yard within the following year or 2. What this means for your yard is this. The birds you're watching now may be the descendants of birds that were using your yard long before you started paying attention. The relationship between your yard and those birds is older than your side of it. The University of Washington Crow research shows the clearest version of this. Offspring learned human threat assessments by watching their parents. It wasn't instinct, it was observation. The crows mobbing a researcher 5 years into the study had never encountered that researcher directly. Their parents had. They inherited the file. I've been in my yard for 5 years. I find myself wondering, sometimes, how long the yard has been in the files, How many winters before I started standing at that kitchen window? How many cardinals knew the holly bush by the fence before I learned which bird was sleeping in it? The territory has a history I'm just a recent part of. I've saved this one for last because it has to be last. On a morning in November 2020, 4 days after my dad died, I was standing at the kitchen window. I wasn't watching birds. I was just standing there, holding a cup of coffee, looking at the yard without really seeing it. November bare, the feeders mostly quiet. And then a male northern cardinal landed in the holly bush by the back fence. He had a small notch in the primary feathers of his right wing, distinctive enough that I'd noticed it a few times before and filed it away as probably the same individual. I didn't think much of it that morning. I just watched him for a while, and then I went back to whatever the day required of me. He came back the following winter, and the winter after that, and this past winter, which puts him at 4 consecutive winters in my yard, always in or near the same holly bush, always identifiable by that notch in the right primary feathers. Here's what I know, scientifically. Northern cardinals demonstrate strong site fidelity, return to within 50 meters of prior territory year after year. This bird, this specific individual, has been making a navigational decision to return to this specific holly in this specific yard for 4 consecutive winters. That is documented behavior. That is measurable. That is a thing ornithology can describe and account for. Here's what I don't know. I don't know why he first appeared 4 days after my dad died. I don't know what it means, if it means anything, that he has kept coming back to that same bush for 4 winters running. I've read a fair amount about what cardinals represent in grief traditions across the American South and Midwest, and I want to be careful with that material. I'm not going to tell you this cardinal is a message from my dad. I'm not going to tell you it isn't. What I can tell you is this. A specific bird, identifiable by a specific notch in a specific feather, has been choosing my specific yard, this particular holly bush, this particular fence line, for 4 winters. The science explains why he comes back. It does not explain what to do with that emotionally. The site fidelity paper doesn't cover that part. I'm still trying to figure out what to make of it. After 4 winters, I'm genuinely still trying. The bird at your window this morning is not random. The cardinal that returns every winter, the chickadees at the Tuesday morning feeder, the robin that rebuilds in the same tree fork every April. They chose your yard. Out of every yard on your block, every yard in your neighborhood, they made navigational decisions, year after year, to come back to yours. Some of them crossed 2,000 miles to do it. Some of them learned your yard from their parents before they could fly on their own. Some of them have a file on you that has been building longer than you've been paying attention. The yard they keep coming back to is yours. Specifically, irreplaceably, yours. And in a world where everything feels temporary, having a wild animal choose your patch of ground year after year, that's not nothing. Has a bird ever kept returning to you, year after year, in a way you couldn't quite explain away? I want to hear about it. I read every one. I'll see you in the next one.